A 9-year-old girl is locked inside a stranger's bedroom, handcuffed to a shower head, with no idea if she will see the next sunrise. Instead of freezing in terror, she starts memorizing everything around her: a wristwatch, a toy, a phone number. She has never taken a self-defense class. She has never been trained by police. Everything she knows about surviving this moment, she learned from watching crime shows with her older brother. What happens over the next 72 hours would turn a terrified child into the reason her own kidnapper ended up behind bars for the rest of his life. In the early summer of 2003, in a quiet residential pocket of San Jose, California, a man had already spent time watching a house before anyone in the family noticed him. He knew when the children came home from school. He knew when the house sat empty. And on an ordinary afternoon, while Jeannette Tamayo's mother was still at work, he made his move, breaking into the house through her bedroom window well before the school bus was due to arrive. Jeannette had no idea any of this had happened. She stepped off the bus like any other day, walked up to her front door, and noticed something small but wrong. The screen door was open just slightly more than it should have been. She assumed her mother had come home early. It was only once she stepped inside her own bedroom that the wrongness became impossible to ignore. Glass from her shattered window covered the floor. Her stomach dropped. She ran for the phone to call her mother, but when she picked it up, there was nothing. The line had been deliberately cut. Before she could process what was happening, someone knocked at the door. A man she had never seen before stood on the other side of the screen, asking vague questions while his eyes moved past her, scanning the inside of the house. Something about him felt instantly wrong to her, and she began sliding the door shut. He was faster. He forced it open, grabbed her, and pulled her further into the house. What followed in the next several minutes was a violent sexual assault. Details that will not be repeated here out of respect for Jeannette, and in keeping with what is appropriate to describe. When it was over, he restrained her with handcuffs and rope and began moving her toward the garage, where his car was waiting. He tried to lift the garage door to make his escape, but before he could get it more than a few inches off the ground, headlights swung into the driveway. It was Jeannette's mother, Rosalia, arriving home with her son, Paul, who was 15 at the time. From the back seat of the kidnapper's car, Jeannette caught a glimpse of the vehicle she knew better than any other in the world, and for one brief second, she let herself believe rescue had arrived. Paul reached the garage first, sliding underneath the partially raised door. Jeannette managed to scream at him to run, not toward her, but away, back to safety. He didn't listen. At 15, facing a grown man twice his size, Paul grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a screwdriver off a nearby counter, and charged at his sister's attacker anyway. It didn't go well. The man disarmed him almost instantly and began beating him. Jeannette, still bound by the handcuffs and rope, could do nothing but watch through the car window. The fight spilled back into the house, and that's where Rosalia met the attacker face to face for the first time. She threw herself into the confrontation without hesitation, physically pulling the man away from her son. Paul, refusing to stay out of it, grabbed a frying pan from the kitchen and tried again to fight back. Once more, the man overpowered him, wrenched the pan away, and turned it on Rosalia instead, striking her repeatedly until she collapsed. From inside the car, Jeannette heard her mother's screams cut off into silence, and in that moment, she genuinely believed her entire family was dead. The man ran back to the garage, got in the car, and sped off. As they tore through a neighbor's yard to avoid the street, Jeannette twisted around in her restraints and looked back one last time. What she saw gave her something to hold on to. Her mother, bloodied but alive, chasing after the car on foot. Behind her, Paul was limping toward neighbors, waving for help and screaming for someone to call the police. Jeannette tried to draw attention too, slamming her shoulder against the car window to signal passing drivers. But her kidnapper noticed and struck her with the same screwdriver Paul had used against him earlier. She pulled back out of his reach and, for the first time since it had all started, allowed herself to believe she might not survive the day. Back at the house, police and paramedics arrived to a scene soaked in blood, with a mother who refused to get into the ambulance until she had told detectives everything she possibly could. Lead Detective Heather Randall walked into a crime scene that told her almost everything, except the one thing she needed most: where the girl had gone. The garage told a story of extreme violence. The bedroom told the same story. A security camera mounted on a neighbor's house had caught grainy footage of the car and confirmed this had been a targeted attack, not a random break-in. But the image quality wasn't sharp enough to read a license plate, and under California law at the time, that single missing detail meant an official statewide Amber Alert couldn't be issued. Rather than wait, Randall's team went straight to the media, hoping the public could do what the alert system couldn't. Helicopters circled overhead with loudspeakers broadcasting Jeannette's name. Flyers went up across the city. Press conferences ran one after another. It wasn't the alert system working as designed. It was an entire community being asked, informally, to become the search party. Meanwhile, Jeannette had been taken to a house across town, carried up to a small second-floor room with a bed, a television, a narrow window, and a bathroom. The man returned to assault her repeatedly over the following hours, and each time it ended, he would cuff her wrist to the showerhead, run the water, and leave her alone. Strange as it sounds, that shower became the closest thing she had to safety, because it was the only time he wasn't in the room with her. The next morning, still trapped, she watched the news from that small television and saw her own face on the screen. A cousin spoke directly into the camera, telling her to stay strong, to not give up, that people were looking for her. It reached her. Somewhere in that room, a plan started to form. She decided her best chance wasn't to fight him physically. She had already seen what that led to with her brother, but to make him trust her instead. She started small, asking him something as ordinary as where he was from. It caught him off guard. For the first time since the kidnapping began, he smiled at her, and she made herself smile back, swallowing every instinct that told her to do the opposite. She followed it by asking for something simple, a glass of water. He agreed, handcuffed her to the bed, and left the room to get it. The first time he had left her alone since it all began. With him gone, she immediately started working at the handcuffs. They weren't the kind that needed a key. She found a small latch and button by feel, and after some trial and error, figured out how to release herself. Now free, but with no idea how long she had, she thought fast. She remembered watching crime procedurals with her brother, shows where investigators were always searching for physical evidence to identify a suspect. So she grabbed what she could, the man's watch off the nightstand, a small toy from a pile he'd left for her, and remembering how those same shows discussed forensic evidence in assault cases, her own underwear. She had just enough time to reset the handcuffs and lie back down before she heard him coming back up the stairs. 2 days in, back in San Jose, investigators still had almost nothing solid to work with, despite an enormous public effort. When police tried to gently prepare Rosalia for the possibility that most abducted children aren't found alive after the first 2 days, she refused to accept it. She kept insisting her daughter was alive, and she kept demanding updates, refusing to let anyone treat the search as anything less than urgent. Inside the house, Jeannette pushed her plan further. When her captor asked if she was hungry, she said yes, and he handed her his own cell phone to order a pizza. As the person on the other end of the line asked for a delivery address, the man gave it to her to repeat back, and just as she had done days earlier while memorizing turns during the drive to the house, she committed every digit and street detail to memory. When the food eventually arrived, he came back into the room with a strange look on his face and set the box down. On top of it sat a missing person flyer with her photo on it. He told her plainly that he intended to get rid of her that night. The moment he left the room again, she moved fast, gathering the watch, the toy, and everything else she'd collected and stuffing it all inside the empty pizza box, hiding it under the bed. When he returned, instead of talking, he grabbed a pillow and pressed it over her face. She fought for air, pushing against him until she managed to twist her head just enough to steal one breath before he pulled the pillow away and, almost casually, asked if she wanted to take a shower. Later, someone knocked loudly at the front door downstairs. Jeannette wanted to scream for help, but he clamped a hand over her mouth until the visitor gave up and left. Not long after, he walked her down through a dark garage, put her back in the car in restraints, and started driving. This ride was different from the first, longer, more disorienting, more than 30 minutes on the road, making it far harder for her to track their route. At some point, she stopped fighting the fear and simply told herself she had done everything she possibly could, preparing herself for the worst. But she hadn't given up completely. When the car finally slowed, it pulled into the parking lot of a convenience store near a highway. He yanked her by the hair, looked her in the eye, and told her he was letting her go, followed immediately by a threat that if she ever told anyone what he looked like or what he'd done, he would come back and kill her entire family. Then he was gone. Jeannette ran straight for the store. The man behind the counter took one look at her and asked if she was okay, before recognizing her from the news coverage that had been running for days. He didn't wait for her to explain. He picked up the phone and called 911 himself, staying with her while she tried, hands shaking, to process that she had actually made it out alive. When Detective Randall arrived, Jeannette didn't wait to be asked questions. She immediately started pulling items out of her pockets. The watch, the toy, her underwear, each one a small, deliberate piece of evidence she had risked her life to collect. Randall, stunned by what the girl had managed to do, asked if there was anything else she remembered. Jeannette asked for paper and began sketching the layout of the house, the partial address, the phone number from the pizza call, and every landmark she could recall from both car rides. While one team of officers began calling every pizzeria in the area to match the delivery number to an exact address, Randall asked Jeannette directly whether she thought she could help lead them back to the house. She said she believed she could, guiding officers turn by turn, left, right, left, from memory alone. Confirmation came quickly once the pizza place matched the phone number to a specific address, and officers moved in with a SWAT team and K-9 unit. Inside the home, the suspect, identified as David Montiel Cruz, attempted to resist and evade officers, eventually being found hiding in the attic before he was taken into custody. Investigators recovered the pizza box hidden under the bed exactly where Jeannette had left it, along with the items she had gathered. Cruz was later charged with multiple felony counts, including kidnapping, burglary, and sexual assault, and was ultimately convicted and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Jeannette's physical wounds, including injuries from the earlier assault with a screwdriver, were treated at the hospital, where she was finally reunited with her mother and brother, both of whom had also been hospitalized for the injuries they sustained trying to protect her. The recovery that followed wasn't quick or simple. For years afterward, Jeannette struggled with intense fear, particularly around men and unfamiliar situations, and largely withdrew from the outside world. It took roughly 6 years of therapy before she felt ready to begin truly facing what had happened to her. As an adult, rather than let that chapter define her as a victim, Jeannette chose to study law enforcement with the goal of one day becoming a detective herself, following the same path as the woman who helped bring her home. She has also spoken publicly about her experience, hoping to become a voice for other survivors, and for missing children whose stories don't always get the same attention hers did. What makes Jeannette Tamayo's story so remarkable isn't just that she survived. Plenty of survival stories involve luck, timing, or someone else's intervention. Hers involved a 9-year-old consciously choosing, in the middle of unimaginable fear, to think instead of panic, to plan instead of freeze, and to treat her own abduction as a case that needed solving. She used the only tools she had, patience, observation, and the kind of quiet courage most adults never have to test. It's the reason her kidnapper is in prison for life, and it's the reason her story continues to be told, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof of what a child is capable of when everything is on the line.